Hello students, I'm Aanchal Sharma, your educator. In this video, we are going to discuss about G.V. Desani, another novelist. So this person in front of you is G.V. Desani. Govindas Vishnudas Desani was born in 1909 in Nairobi, that is in Kenya, to a Sindhi family. He traveled to England and later returned to India to become the correspondent for the Times of India. He was the BBC broadcaster during the 1930s and 1940s as well. G.V. Desani was the first Indian writer in English to use the full resources of the Western literary tradition to create a fictional genre, typically Indian in style but global in representation. Whenever we talk about G.V. Desani, there are two works that are very famous. First is Haley, because it is read widely, and then he is very famous for All About H. Hatter. All About H. Hatter, you can also call it. Right. So G.V. Desani is so famous. Why? Because he is the one who keeps on playing with the language of our country, or you can say the language or the English language that we use. So we often think that it is Salman Rushdie who introduced this concept of chutneyfication, but it is him, the Salman Rushdie only, who praised G.V. Desani, who has started with this concept of chutneyfying the language. He was the one who created his own style, own fictional genre in which he used to play with the language. He used to use the language in such a manner that was Indianized in itself. So he was the one who typically produced this Indian language that was very much Indian in style but global in representation. His dexterity to lampoon the national and the transnational cultures in Rabelaisian and the Dickensian fashion, and yet to be able to experiment with the Indian language in the Joycean manner makes him a person, or makes him a writer who was par excellence and who is par excellence. For decades, H. Hatter remains a minor classic work that was absent because it was Haley that was widely read. But as the theorists or as the different writers paid attention to it, this work became very famous. For decades, H. Hatter remained a minor classic in absentia, giving the subversive twist of the Indian-British relations and releasing the quintessential flavor of the diasporic experience through a mock heroic style. This is a work, the All About H. Hatter, which was an absentia. It was not much focused on. It was completely lost. This later became a very important work which talks about the twist in the language of how Indian and British relations are seen, and the quintessential flavor of the diasporic experience is given, but it is given through a mock heroic style. Desani taps the rich resources of the provincial Indian dialects and the Anglo-Indian Pidgin English. So here we see that chutneyfying of the language, chutneyfication of the language is being done. Then let us read here. Desani taps the rich resources of the provincial Indian dialects and the Anglo-Indian Pidgin English to forge a new mock heroic or the mock epic style that is in the Shandanian manner, and it surprises to represent and to rap and to woof on all the Indian reality. He is someone who in the most comic manner and in the most epic comic manner now plays with the language. He keeps on playing with the language. All the books that he has written are playing with the language only. He mocks, he laughs on the other person, he laughs upon the philosophies of the Indian culture. He talks about how we rely so much on saints. Why do we think that this culture that is propagated or this mysticism that is followed in our country is too much hype? So he keeps on talking about all of these things. Desani has been able to create a prose style that allows him to go beyond the English that was being used at that time, to go beyond the Englishness of the English. That is why he earned the title of Lawrence Sterne of India. He just got the title of Lawrence Stern of India. Why? Because he was going beyond the Englishness that was used at that time. He used to play with the language. He is remembered more for his largely unread novel All About H. Hatter. It's a novel published in 1948, and less for his mystical epic that he wrote. It's an epic drama called as Haley, that is read, and it was more widely read. Many Indian writers in English have been deeply influenced by the rich mixing of the style, different idioms, and the traditions in the novel All About H. Hatter. There are different allusions, there are different idioms that he keeps on using, and he makes the language very different from what we used during that time. Some people or some Indian readers used to think that it is incomprehensible. The novel was incomprehensible, but as other writers focused on it, the readership and the people who used to examine this book also increased. The Western reader placed the main focus on this book, and later the unread novel became a very famous novel. The play Haley that he has written is more rooted in the imaginary and the symbolism and the apocalyptical version and the passion, and it is about the protagonist who goes through a series of emotional and spiritual trials and tribulations that force him to confront about the basic human passions and reality about life, about love, and about death. So what is Haley talking about? Haley is basically a mystic work that talks about and questions what is life, what is love, what is death. The spiritual person or the protagonist goes through this journey and then asks this question. His spiritual awakening, triumph, and love for humanity makes it a remarkable play that combines the religious traditions of that time. There is also Christianity and Hindu practices that this novel talks about. Though Haley is short and tightly knit play, the last section, that is A Rose of the Lilac Light, is dragged to about 4 pages. So we think that it is a comprehensive book, but the last section that could have been completed in just a single para or maybe 2 paras, it is stretched. So what is G.V. Desani doing? G.V. Desani is just playing with the words. He is making the novels or the books or the poems he is writing or the novels he is writing in a most incomprehensive manner, so that he can question the mysticism of that time. He can question spirituality. He can question the language that we use during that time. It seems Desani was working on the second novel as well, but before his death, we could not see another novel that he was about to write. So it is called as the Risala. So it is said that he was writing, but we could not receive it. So let us read this line. Like a jack in the box, this fitter Jenkins sprang up from nowhere, became airworthy and bounced up skywards. Do you understand this line? It becomes very incomprehensible. This is a line from a very important book that is all about H. Hatter that he wrote. So these are the lines, and these are the things that he keep on doing. He plays with the language in such a way that it is very difficult for the readers to understand. So the summary of the novels that he is writing is not important. It is not important that what and how he is writing all of these things, but how he is playing with the language, that is the essence. So broadly we know the plot and the structure. So we know that there are 7 states that the person called as H. Hatter, Hindustan Wala Hatter, will be meeting, and the play or the plot is not important, but it is what is the outcome that becomes more important. So All About H. Hatter is a novel by G.V. Desani that chronicles the adventures of an Anglo-Malayan man who calls himself the Hindustan Wala Hatter. He is in search of wisdom and enlightenment. The novel deals with his search for himself. He, being a man, is now on a spiritual journey of enlightenment, and he's talking about what he's searching about, the truth of life. He's talking about himself. He visits 7 cities and consults 7 sages, and each of whom have been specialized in different manners, and they only talk about the living. And by talking to them, the protagonist, Hatter, will come to know what is the essence of life. The novel is a comic extravagance. The lampoon will show us a lot and will tell us a lot about the life we live in. The character H. Hatter is represented in a very comic vein manner. The charm, the vitality, and the linguistic humor creates a very unique experience and gives a unique touch to the hero, who is now taking us on this path of a very puzzling prose that is given to us. It was none other than Anthony Burgess who wrote the introduction to this novel. So till that time, this novel was lost, but Anthony Burgess wrote the introduction of the novel and praised the language. And after that, this novel started to become a novel that was read worldwide. He said, it is not pure English. It is like Shakespeare. It is like Joyce. It is like Kipling. Gloriously impure. It is gloriously impure and different than the other one. It is the language that makes it a book itself. The novel is full of wonderful textual fun and games. The comparison with the Joyce Ulysses is intended to be a comparison which is of compliment. So this novel is compared to Ulysses. Just as Ulysses is a book that is incomprehensible, a lot of us, if you first time read that book, it would be something that will go over your head and you won't be able to comprehend even a single word. Gradually, you will understand what is the writer wants, what is the writer's intention and what is he talking about. All About H. Hatter is in about 7 chapters. Critics have observed that the novel represents E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, because this novel also deals with the metaphysical elements. So we have one novel, A Passage to India, that was written about in 1924. It was written by E.M. Foster, and E.M. Foster took this name, A Passage to India, from a poem from Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman's poem is called as Passage to India, and it was published in the book or the publication, The Leaves of Grass. You should remember it and study intertextually, right? So, E.M. Foster wrote the book A Passage to India, and the book can be compared, and the name are also, the book can be compared to the work of E.M. Foster. And E.M. Foster's work, A Passage to India, the title is taken from Walt Whitman's poem. Though All About H. Hatter is a comic prose, we can consider it as a philosophical fiction also, because our protagonist will go to different cities, about 7 cities, and he is going to meet 7 saints, and each saint will either give him a lesson or will tell him something, and there will be mishaps all around. So he will never get the essence of life. He will keep on asking about all of these things. He will then question why mysticism is so important in our country. Then gradually he will learn what is the essence of life. Why are we, fighting between one another? There are different questions that Hatter would talk about. Hatter is a hero not because of his heroic qualities or because of the achievements or because of something that is great in his life, but because he has lost the outer world to gain the experience of the inner world. The novel has no story to narrate on its own, but it is the unquenchable thirst of H. Hatter that makes him the person who is running after the wisdom of life. The 7 sages and the 7 cities he visits will tell him at the end the truth of life. In the first chapter, H. Hatter would meet a sage called as the Sage of Calcutta, also known as the Sage of Bitterness. He turns out to be a second-hand clothes seller, and he is going to steal all the clothes of H. Hatter. And this is how H. Hatter would first of all will lose his job. He will take away the clothes that he was wearing and will only leave him with a single towel, and the towel will have this impression of GIP railway. Then Hatter would meet the sage of Rangoon, who is now the resident of India. The sage preaches him the desire for women is the root of all the problems in his life. Therefore, the carnal desire in man should be eliminated and distinguished. Then he also meet the sage of Madras, who was a stock exchange businessman, and he was living a very mundane life. Then he encounters Sadanand, always happy, Sadanand. The uniqueness about this person is that this sage was much younger than Hatter, about 30 years younger than him. So how he becomes someone who can actually give or tell something about life to a person who is elder to him. These are the questions that will pop up in between. Then he meets the sage of Bombay, otherwise known as the Master Ananda Girigiri, who became very much attached to H. Hatter and also attempts to physically and spiritually combine with our protagonist. So he wants a spiritual and a physical union. He also wants to become friends with our protagonist. So this was another sage that H. Hatter met. Hatter runs into the sage of Delhi, and he tried to became his disciple as well. The sage of Delhi preaches him the reality and shows him the world of mystery. Then the order of Nagas or the Naga Sadhu is also someone our protagonist will meet, but this sage is going to steal the money and disrobe our protagonist. Later, he encounters Pandit Pancham as well, and he is also going to tell a lot about life and going to preach it to our protagonist. While in England, Desani published his poetic play Haley as well. And this is a short fiction, and it sketches, and there are different sketches and there are different essays. Shortly after the publication of Haley, Desani left Britain and then returned to India. He was offered the position of cultural ambassador for Jawaharlal Nehru, but he withdrew, or he never took this job. In 1959, he traveled to Burma to study about Buddhist and Hindu culture. This is how he was so interested in mysticism also. During the 1950s and 1960s, he wrote a regular column called as Very High, Very Low, as well as some articles in the Times of India and Illustrated Weekly of India. In 1967, he was appointed the professor of philosophy at University of Texas, and then at the end he retired in 1978. Finally, he spent the later part of his life in Dallas. This is what we should know about a very important novelist, G.V. Desani. Now, this is a question that was asked in our paper as well. Which of the following novels acted as an influence on Salman Rushdie in forging the new narrative style in English? So, this question is asking you, which novel influenced Salman Rushdie to adopt this very different narrative style? He was inspired by which writer? Was it Raja Rao's Kanthapura? Was it G.V. Desani's All About H. Hatter? Was it Mulk Raj Anand's Untouchable? Or R.K. Narayan's The Sweet Vendor? So as I told you, it is definitely B, that is the right answer. It was All About H. Hatter by G.V. Desani that inspired Salman Rushdie. He has written that this book is remarkable, and what makes it the most remarkable piece of our literature is that the use of language. So chutneyfication is important. That is our essence, and that is very much projected in this novel by G.V. Desani. So I hope I made things clear. You are clear with this novelist called as G.V. Desani. If any question is asked, you will be able to handle that. Thank you so much for watching the video. We will come again with another set of novelists and poets. Thank you so much.